It's night in the heart of the Mayan Empire. You're 14 years old. You're kneeling before the most powerful priest in the kingdom. Your hands are trembling. A single word from him can decide if you go back home or if you disappear forever. What really happened on these nights? History tried to erase it. Today, you're going to find out. The Maya built one of the most advanced civilizations in history. Astronomy, mathematics, monumental architecture. But behind this greatness existed something rarely spoken about, a religious system governed by blood rituals. And within this system there was a specific night, a ceremony that happened in secret. Only the priests knew exactly what would happen. Families only found out the next day, when some daughters came back home and others didn't. Young girls were chosen for what they called a spiritual examination. Some returned marked, others disappeared into the temples as if they had never existed. So what really happened on this night? Why were some released and others never seen again? And the most disturbing part? Why was this considered an honor? Today we're going to enter the most feared night among the Maya, the one where the priest decided the fate of young girls. And you'll understand why this ceremony was kept in absolute secrecy. Everything started weeks before. Temple messengers visited villages. They carried a list, names of young girls between 13 and 16 years old who needed to appear at the temple on the next full moon. It wasn't an invitation, it was a divine order. The selection followed specific criteria. They had to come from respected families, but not necessarily noble ones. They had to demonstrate physical health. And above all, they could never have participated in wedding ceremonies or transitions to adult life. They needed to be in that intermediate state between girl and woman. When a family received the notice, the reaction was complex. On one hand, there was pride. Your daughter was chosen by the gods. On the other, absolute terror, because nobody knew exactly what would happen in there. Mothers prepared their daughters in silence. They washed their hair with specific herbs, dressed them in white tunics, but they couldn't explain what was coming because they themselves didn't know. And here's the first disturbing detail. The young girls were instructed not to show fear. They couldn't cry. They couldn't resist. Any sign of weakness could be interpreted as spiritual impurity, and impurity had consequences. But what did the priest really evaluate in them? And what happened to those who showed fear? You're about to find out. When night arrived, the young girls were taken to the main temple. There was no light beyond the torches. The air was heavy with copal smoke, a sacred resin that altered the senses. The walls were covered with paintings showing gods thirsting for blood. The floor was stained with previous offerings, and in the center, a stone platform where the priest waited. He entered with absolute authority, wore elaborate masks, body paint, ritual objects made of jade and obsidian. He didn't speak like a common man. Every word was treated as the direct voice of the gods. The young girls were ordered to kneel in a row. They couldn't look up. They couldn't move. The priest began to walk among them, inspecting each one. First came the visual assessment. He examined their postures, their expressions, looked for signs of fear, defiance, or hesitation. Any trembling could be interpreted as resistance to the gods. Then the marks. With obsidian blades, he made superficial cuts on their arms, small ritual incisions. This was called purification by blood. Those who bled without crying were considered brave. Those who showed pain, Well, that was noted. But the most intense part was still to come. The priest began to ask questions. These weren't normal questions. They were spiritually tests. Are you willing to serve the gods with your body? Do you accept that your life is not yours, but belongs to the cosmos? If the gods demanded your life tomorrow, would you offer it without hesitation? And here's the detail that frightens most. There was no right or wrong answer. What mattered was the tone of voice, the speed of response, the gaze. The priest was reading something beyond words. Some young girls were separated at this moment, taken to a side chamber. The others remained kneeling, not knowing what would happen next. And then came the physical tests, standing still for hours, maintaining painful positions, enduring the heat of torches close to the skin, drinking bitter liquids that provoked visions. The objective was clear: break any resistance, transform these young girls into perfect instruments of divine will. But what did those marks mean? And why were some separated from the others right at the beginning? Their fate depended on this.
When dawn approached, the priest finally pronounced the judgments, and here the fate divided into three very different paths. First group, those considered pure. These young girls had passed all the tests, demonstrated resistance, obedience, and total acceptance. They could go back home, but not as before. They carried visible marks on their arms, ritual scars that everyone recognized. From that moment on, they spiritually belonged to the temple. They were called for specific ceremonies, had monthly obligations. Their lives would never be completely their own again. Some families celebrated. Others cried in silence, because they knew the young girl was now trapped in a destiny she couldn't refuse. Second group, the imperfect ones. These had demonstrated fear, hesitation, or physical weakness. They weren't worthy of going back home, but they also weren't pure enough for sacrifice. They were taken to work inside the temple complex. Heavy tasks, cleaning altars, preparing offerings. They lived under constant surveillance, could be punished for any mistake. Ritual punishments were common. Some spent years there. Others died from exhaustion or diseases. Few managed to eventually leave, but always marked physically and emotionally. Third group, the chosen ones. This was the most mysterious and most feared destiny. The young girls considered too perfect for common life. Those who showed something special during the rituals, a connection with the divine. They didn't go back home, and they weren't put to work. They were isolated in special chambers inside the temple, fed with specific diets, prepared. Prepared for what? To become living offerings. In the great festivals, when the gods demanded high-value human sacrifices, it was these young girls who climbed to the top of the pyramids. The process could take months. During this time, they were treated as divinities, received fine clothes, were worshipped. But they knew that each day brought them closer to the final moment. And here's the most disturbing detail of all. Many accepted it, not by real choice, but because the entire process was designed to break their will, to make them believe this was the greatest possible purpose. But why did the Maya do this? What justified such brutality? To understand this night, you need to understand how the Maya saw the universe. For them, the cosmos wasn't stable. It was a constant battle between order and chaos, between light and darkness. The gods kept the sun rising, the rains falling, the harvests growing. But they demanded payment, and the most valuable payment was human blood, especially from young people in transition between childhood and adult life. The priest wasn't a torturer, he was an intermediary. His function was to identify which young girls had the strongest spiritual energy. Those who, when offered, would guarantee the survival of the entire civilization. So for the Maya, this night wasn't cruelty, it was sacred duty. It was what separated their society from total collapse. Families understood this. As much as it hurt, they believed their daughters were saving the world. And this makes everything even more disturbing, because it wasn't just violence, it was a complete system of beliefs that transformed suffering into virtue. So what happened to the sacrificed young girls? In the great festivals, they were taken to the top of the pyramids. Before thousands of people, the priest performed the final ritual, and their bodies were offered to the gods. For us today, it seems brutal, it seems unacceptable, but for the Maya, it was the only path to maintain the balance of the cosmos. This nighttime ceremony was hidden for centuries. The records were erased, but archaeological evidence shows it happened repeatedly for generations. And here's the final detail. This wasn't the only obscure ceremony. There was an even more secret ritual, one that involved not just young girls, but entire families, and it was performed in deep caves, far from any witness. But that is a story for another video. If this video impacted you, imagine the work it took to research and put together. If you can leave a like and subscribe to the channel, it really helps to continue bringing stories that nobody else tells. And if you want to know about that even more obscure ritual, comment down below. Until next time.